welcome to today's broadcast of A View from the Nest. I'm your eye in the sky, Alan Scott, traveling across the cyberscape from high atop my perch at WNGS Studios, bringing you today's news and commentary from a conservative Christian viewpoint. You may wish to visit us on the web at www.eagleviews.org or follow us on Twitter at Eagle's Nest. Hi folks, Al Scott here, keeping a sharp eagle eye focused on current events, ever vigilant and standing ready to fight for faith, family, and freedom. A true moderate who believes that moderation is the key to freedom. No golden microphone here, just the values of the golden rule. And this is the way I see it.
The words debt ceiling fight are enough to make any observer of U.S. politics cringe. Now Washington could be heading for another. Treasury Secretary Jack Lew said Monday the nation will hit its borrowing limit sometime in mid-October. This is the same dilemma Washington faced in August 2011 in a fight that eventually led to sequestration cuts last winter. Both parties agreed to across-the-board reductions if they couldn't compromise. And they didn't compromise, although the effects of the sequester weren't as doom and gloom as they were made out to be. A failure to reach a deal will mean the U.S. can only spend money it raises through tax revenue on a day-to-day basis. The president has said he won't negotiate over lifting the $16.7 trillion debt limit, which has been raised 72 times since 1962. Monday, Lew warned that if investors doubted the U.S. could pay off its loans, the uncertainty could undermine financial markets and result in significant disruptions to our economy. Raising the debt ceiling does not authorize any future spending. It simply pays off funding decisions that have already been made.
Thomas Jefferson said the principle of spending money to be paid by posterity under the name of funding is nothing but swindling futurity on a large scale. Congress will return from its August recess to face a $16.7 trillion debt ceiling. $16.7 trillion. That's with a T, folks. Debt ceiling that the government is expected to reach by mid-October. Treasury Secretary Jack Lew urged Congress in a letter late this week to raise the debt limit as soon as possible in order for the government to meet its fiscal obligations. Apparently, they're unable to meet their fiscal obligations because they continue to spend more than they collect. The debt ceiling is nothing but a joke. It's just the latest development in an overreaching government. They continue to spend more money than they have, and they continue to have to borrow more, which is the reason for raising the debt ceiling, so we can borrow more money. And of course, it has to be done as soon as possible, as quickly as we can, because God forbid if the federal government should have to take a pay cut. You and I, however, we can take pay cuts every day of the week. We can have our hours cut from 40 hours a week to 29 hours a week to accommodate the Obamacare mandate that states somewhere arbitrarily that people who work 30 hours or more are considered full-time, when most people who work 30 hours understand they're not full-time. But to the federal government, they are full-time. And as such, their business, their employer needs to provide for them health insurance, which they themselves chose not to get, or even decided to work for an employer that did not provide it. They knew this when they took the job, but because Congress knows best, and because they just like spending our money and whatever whim that they come up with, decided that 30 hours a week is now considered full-time. So those that have been working more than 30 hours now find their hours cut to less than 30 hours. Their pay is being subsequently cut, but in the end, they're still going to have to pay for health insurance that the government says they need to have. And Jack Lew, but when you turn around and say, government, why don't you live on less? They're always told, well, we can't survive on less. American people, we have to survive on less and less each year, particularly under this administration, who seems to think that taking our money and giving it to people that don't deserve it is their number one priority. Lew has used a few tricks to hold the debt in place since May, including withholding reinvestment in certain government securities and holding back new pension investment. But those gimmicks have reached the end of their usefulness. I failed to mention in this particular article, this is from the Patriot Post, by the way, that they also just happened to freeze the debt number for the last couple of months, it hasn't changed. In other words, the government's not spending any money according to the debt clock. It's remained frozen for about 3 months now. Odd, isn't it? Lou and Barack Obama want a clean debt limit increase, and they refuse to negotiate on the issue. In other words, they want it their way. They don't want to hear from Republicans or the constituency, which is we the American people, what we want. What Obama and Jack Lew want is what they want, which is always what they want. The government always seems to get what it wants, and we the American people get left paying for what the government says it wants. Even though we said no, and some of us even said hell no to Obamacare, guess what? We got it nonetheless, and guess what? We're being asked to pay for it. So Lew and Obama want a clean debt limit increase, and they refuse to negotiate. House Speaker John Boehner says that Republicans will agree to a limit hike only if it's matched by real spending cuts. When have we heard this before? Yes, you got that right. The last time we had this debt ceiling debate. Yes, we'll raise the debt ceiling if we get equal cuts. And we know what happened there, nothing. So the sequester went into place and the government got cut by a whopping 5% across the board. Whoopee wow. And we still find ourselves spending more money than we take in. No more than a year later, we find ourselves right back at the same spot we were before. In other words, there is nobody serious about cutting spending in government. Nobody really cares. They want to keep spending money that we don't have, keep printing money that devalues the dollars that are out there in circulation, thus devouring your pensions and retirement programs. Seniors, hey, wake up. Smell the coffee. This is costing off of your savings, off of your earnings. I mean, it's a joke. I mean, it's criminal what's going on in this country, all being at the hands of these part-time politicians. Well, I can't say part-time politicians anymore because many of them made a career out of this. Anyway, the debt argument is coming up again. Same Bonner argument is, we'll raise the limit if you give us spending cuts. Well, if they give the spending cuts, there's no need to raise the limit. Why don't you just say, just give us spending cuts to stay under the limit? Wouldn't that make more sense? No, we'll give you more spending if you promise to cut back on your spending. And we, the American people, say, just shut the doors, bolt the windows, throw away the checkbook, cut up the credit cards, go home for 6 months. We can live very well without you. Trust me, American people will do just fine without the constant meddling and interference and constant badgering by the federal government. We've seen this movie before. In fact, we've seen it 72 times before. This is a bad rerun, a bad remake. This is like, Scary Movie 4. Well, this is Scary Movie Part 73. Because it's happened over and over and over and over again. The last time talks broke down, we ended up with a budget sequester, crafted and pushed by Obama. In other words, he got his way. The sequester amounted to a meager 2.4% spending cut. I said 5%, but it's 2.4% over a decade, over 10 years. That's a joke. And Obama then turned around and used it as a political bludgeon to beat Republicans for cutting funds to popular programs. The sequester's fiscal impact was negligible. Apparently so, because the government still seems to be spending money. But the irrational reaction to it by Obama, congressional Democrats, and the left media demonstrated just how hard it can be to unwind impending fiscal disaster. Obama has racked up $5 trillion in budget deficits all by himself since taking office. He's been in office a little over 4 years. He's been spending $1 trillion a year since he's been in office, complete with wasted fiscal stimulus packages and the budget-smashing Obamacare law, which hasn't really been fully implemented yet. And he has no plans to change now. Indeed, if he continues to have his way, spending will continue at its present pace. In other words, $1 trillion a year over and above what they're taking. It's not like the government's not taking in money. I mean, good God, $2 trillion a year plus they're taking in. They're taking from us. $2 trillion plus, and that's still not enough. When is it ever going to be enough? Answer, when we're all broke and they have all the money. They're collecting taxes now. Tax revenues are above over last year. In other words, they took in more money than the year before in taxes, and yet they're still spending more than they took in. So there's never going to be in fact, I don't think ever, except maybe the short time in 1990s when we had an actual balanced budget where actually the government spent no more than what they take in, and I think they still ran up a deficit. In other words, there is never going to be a time when the government's going to live on what it takes in, unless we, the American people, say, enough! Fiscal conservatives have to be strong and demand reduced spending, though until this administration is gone, there's little hope of its success. We've seen it before. We've heard the same rhetoric. The same actors, the same players, the same stars of the show are still on the stage, and they're still prancing and pouncing and propagating the same lie they've been propagating for the last 4 years. We have to have more money, we have to have more money, we have to have more money. Now, one thing could be said if they were only concentrating on plans that have been in the works for, say, 10, 12 years, programs that have been in existence. But no, they keep coming up with new schemes, new ways to spend money, new projects, new programs, Obamacare, for example, and out of Obamacare, all the other affiliate programs that are put in place to put Obamacare in place, like this feasibility, or what they call it, the navigators that navigate you to help you find your way and how to get in one of these exchanges to obtain Obamacare, and all the, and the IRS agents they have to hire, plus the people to counsel and explain to insurers how to make this thing work. I mean, it's just a never-ending thing. It just keeps growing by exponentially exploding. I mean, $1 trillion a year extra that they're spending is going to equate to 4, 5, 6 trillion very soon, because this thing's not getting any smaller, folks. The hole in the side of this sinking ship is getting bigger, and the water's rushing in at a faster pace. This has to stop. I don't see it stop. I don't see the congressmen or the elected leaders having the will to face this issue. We, the American people, have to put a stop to it. Mark Levin has written a new book called The Liberty Amendments, Restoring the Republic, limiting government and putting strict limits on what the government can and cannot do. We would think that the Constitution would be enough. In fact, many colonies all the colonies, well, I say at least 10 of them anyway, were not going to ratify the Constitution until stronger language was placed in the Constitution, thus the Bill of Rights that was amended, the amendment to Bill of Rights that was put in the Constitution, guaranteeing certain rights that the government couldn't infringe. But we've seen, in my lifetime, I've seen each and every one of these amendments, our freedoms, being eviscerated by the government, by the Supreme Court, the freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly, property, individual privacy rights, all this stuff being thrown right out the window because a government just feels that it has to be involved in every little aspect of our life, as if we're incapable of making decisions for ourselves. Granted, there are people out there who don't want to make decisions for themselves and like mommy and daddy or nanny government telling them what they can and can't do, where they can and can't go, how much money they can have, and so forth and so on. But some of us just want to be left alone to mind our own business, live our lives, leave our property, our work, and sweat of our brows for our own family's consumption and not for somebody else's. I don't want to raise somebody else's kids. I want to raise my own. I don't want to educate somebody else's kids. I'll educate my own. I don't want to provide health care for somebody else's grandmother. I'll provide health care. I'll provide medical care for my own family and my own family's needs. That's the way it's supposed to be. That's the way it works. That's the way it provides for the most people at the least possible cost, because then the marketplace determines the value and not some arbitrary figure that the prices have to be inflated because the government is cutting how much they're going to pay in their Medicare, Medicaid programs to the hospitals and to the doctors. So the doctors are doing more work with paperwork and filling out the forms and so forth, getting less money, so therefore they have to raise the rates that they charge so that the amount that they get in return covers the actual cost of the expenses of the operation. If you don't think this to be true, go in with cash sometime and ask the doctor, how much do I have to pay if I pay cash? And you'll find out the rate is lower than if you just put it through your insurance policy. But this is the government gone wild. Mark Levin addresses in his book, The Liberty Amendments. I strongly suggest that any thinking American get the book, borrow it, get it from the library, download a free chapter off his website, marklevin.com, and give it a read. I think you're going to realize that the states, autonomy of the states has been usurped by this ubiquitous federal government and all these bureaucracies and all these nameless, faceless people that work in the federal government that seems to think it's their business and their lot in life to tell us, American people, what we can and cannot do. I'm tired of it. I'm sick of it. I've had enough. I don't want to hear one more program. I don't want to hear one more politician say they need more money. I'm going to say, no, I want more of my money left in my bank account, in my pocket, and left to my family. And we still have no budget. This has been A View from the Nest. Thank you for stopping by. If you'd like to visit us, surf on over to www.eagleviews.org or like us on Twitter @EaglesNest. Until next time, this is Alan Scott. Good day.
Exit stage right!
And that's all, folks.
This has been A View from the Nest. The statements, comments, or opinions expressed are solely that of the author and do not represent the views or opinions of this site or any affiliates thereof.